channel, typically within. Thanks. Okay. All right. So tonight we are going to be talking about primarily the northern impoundments and the southern impoundments. We are doing a bit of investigating on the sand separation area with some of the newer information that has come out, and we haven't quite formulated our position yet. We're still looking into some things on that. So we're not going to really go into that, but we should have some updates in the near future about that area as well. All right, so first we are going to talk about the southern impoundment, and in the last year, something interesting has taken place with the southern impoundment. Essentially, that site was ready to keep moving forward in the process, in the Superfund process, but the northern pit was not. Very different setting at these two pits, different responsible parties, and now we have different site managers. So the EPA went ahead and said, okay, we're going to go ahead and let that southern pit keep progressing in the Superfund process, moving towards physical removal of the contamination, while the northern pit is still up here trying to get its stuff together. So Lauren, I don't know how to say her last name, my guess is Paulus. I should know, but Lauren is the remedial project manager for the southern pit. The southern pit is almost to the remedial action phase of the Superfund process. So the remedial design for the southern pit was approved last summer. And then in September of last year, the EPA issued a unilateral administrative order, which is essentially forcing one of the companies into the cleanup. And so this is interesting that they only attached international paper to the cleanup of the southern pit. Whereas you have both of the companies at the northern pit, you have International Paper and the waste management subsidiary Mimic. So in September of last year, the order was issued for the cleanup of the southern pit. International Paper sent back their intent to comply. And it was an interesting document to read. They basically said, yes, we will comply, but we don't agree with a whole host of things. One of those things was, in fact, that the agency was not naming the waste management subsidiary a responsible party in the cleanup of the southern site. So that was a bit of a twist that from what we did previously. So as I mentioned, this site has continued moving forward towards construction, and physical removal of waste is actually expected to start this fall. So the pre-construction sampling was done in the last few months. And what they did basically was, let me go the slide ahead. Here's the outline of the site. It's a little hard to see up here. It says dashed line, but I know those of you in the room are pretty familiar with what that footprint looks like. There are the specific areas here where you see the black dots. These are the areas that are going to be excavated. In total, this is about 20 acres, but the whole area is not contaminated with dioxin and PCBs according to the sampling that's been done to date. There are hot spots. And so what's been done over the last few months is they have been taking bore samples, drilling down and sampling at various depths. And then they've been doing what is called step out sampling, where they then go out distances beyond that to see how far out from those hot spots the waste actually is and where it is not, where they can stop the excavation line. And so they did a couple of rounds of that in more recent months. So There were over 200 samples or borings that were done in recent months to confirm these exact areas that are shown here, where they're going to be removing the dioxin contaminated material from this southern pit. So this site, as I mentioned, it's moving full steam ahead. Even though there was a minor delay more recently, it's still expected to keep moving ahead, for that not to be a problem, and to see physical construction begin at this site this fall. Pretty big deal. I know a lot of you in this room have been involved for this for a very, very long time, and that will be a great day. Yes.
Is that allowed into the watering?
Yes, so there is an area right here that does go into the water. They're gonna have to build a bulkhead right here, and excavate this area right here. But I will ask more specifically what type of testing was done on that area, because that's a really good question, and it, makes me think that there's some special circumstances that should be considered there versus an inland sample. Right, so I'll make sure I am covering everything tonight that I say I am. All right, so now we are going to head into the northern waste pit. Again, as I mentioned, it's at a different place in the Superfund process. The northern waste pit is right here at Remedial Design. Whereas we just covered it over here in the next phase. So back up here's the Remedial Design to the northern waste pit. Does that go away? No. Okay, so the real design of the northern pit has been a bit more complex than the agency originally thought it was going to be. They thought that the pit was 12 to 14 feet deep. I know a lot of community members were like, there's no way it's only 12 to 14 feet deep.
I think you're frozen. Somebody said that you're like skipping over there.
Okay. So in the sampling that was done in the pre-design investigation for remediation, they found that the waste pit is actually 30 feet deep in some areas, particularly on that northwest area. So what they're looking at doing for the cleanup is two different concepts. Whichever concept that is selected, there will be a double wall of sheet piling, as you see right here. And then inside of this wall, concept one would be pumping out the water down to a depth of about 13 feet. So they would leave some water in the wall. The other concept they're looking at is like you see here, where they would have the double sheet pile wall, and then they would pump out all of the water from the river. Now keep in mind, as they're excavating, they are going to interact with groundwater. And I'll show you all a diagram about that in a little bit. And so one of the risks here, particularly in that northwest corner where it's really deep, 30 feet below, you can experience something called hydraulic heave. And so this is, you actually Google it, find a really good YouTube video. Just Google hydraulic heave, and the first video that pops up is from a university, and you'll see this explained. So it's essentially when a mixing occurs, well, when you have a situation like this, and water interacts with the material, and then the water, it creates a divot like this, if you will. It goes out, and so it creates a depression on the side that was stable and dry. So if you have a situation like this, where there's a construction worker right here excavating this material, and something is slightly off with the pressure, then you can experience hydraulic heat. This side would say that the wall would potentially crushing the workers. Nonetheless, a pretty bad release could occur. So it could be a very serious problem. This was not as risky when you were looking at only holding back 12 feet of the river water. It's easier to control the pressures. But when you're over twice that deep, it's a lot more difficult. So right now, they are still studying the two different methods and which one is going to be the safest method for the river and for the workers. Okay, so I mentioned the groundwater. I love that most of you in the room, I'm not sure who's online, but I love that most of you in the room have been here since the beginning or really close to the beginning of, the waste pits being recognized in the community. And for many years, we would argue with the EPA that there was the possibility of the stuff from this pit and the river's water interacting with the groundwater system. Okay, we found out, yes, that's in fact happening, has been happening. Okay, but what the EPA would always argue was that no, there's a confining layer of gumbo clay underneath. It's a solid confining layer of clay. And gosh, I must have been a geology student back then, and I'm going, no way and how. I'm looking at these geologic maps of the strata under the surface, and it's not the way it is. Finally, the agency or the contractors produce a map. This is not a pretty confining layer under the area. So what we're looking at here is A north is here. A prime is here. So you're looking at a cross section going basically from the river, the side of it, along the river, and up through the pit to the northwest side of the pit. This is a cross section of what's underground and the varying layers. And so these layers that you see here in blue, basically these two right here, the two up there that look like that, they're producing water at a pretty quick rate. So when they're down there and they're excavating, and again, this is showing the surface of the river, the water level of the river. This first marker here is 25 feet, this first line, 25 feet below river surface. There are several different types of layers of material, silt, sand, clay, mixtures of the three that they're going to encounter. And so all of these have to be taken into consideration. And when we're talking about hydraulic heave and we're talking about these risks, these materials play a really important role. And so that's one important consideration. Another important consideration is the rate of groundwater that they're going to be experiencing as they're excavating. What to do with it, right? They have to do something with that. And so they're going to have to pump that and treat that as they're remediating the site, because that groundwater too will very likely be contaminated. From the monitoring wells and the sampling that has taken place, it's been shown to be readily available in the groundwater. So the next 6 months are going to be a really, they're really important for the design of this remedial effort, because the design documents are due to the EPA in several sets of packages. So this quarter, there was a set of documents that were due to the EPA from the responsible parties, contractors. And then in a couple of more months, I think in May, there is another set of technical documents that are due to the EPA. And then in the end of June, the final set of documents is due to the agency. And so we have read, digested, conversed about, looked into, researched, all the things that we do with this latest set of documents that came out. And so first we received the health and safety plan, the emergency response plan, the monitored natural recovery plan, and the transportation and offsite disposal plan. Well, I was expecting a lot of pages in these reports because typically you get a lot. So I got out and started preparing my 3-ring binders, and this is it. This is it. This is all of these reports. This is it. Y'all see how little that is? Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rachel and let her talk to you about this 90% design, the documents, and some details there.
All right. Hey everyone, my name is Rachel Jordan, and I've been the assistant director for THEA for about a year now. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in environmental studies, and I also have a law degree, which focuses in environmental and natural resource law. I want to talk to you all today about some of the things that stood out to us as we went through this 90% remedial design plan. And as we go through this, and then as Jackie goes into a little bit more detail when I'm done, remember that these things are that this plan, the one that we have right now, is not a 100% remedial plan. It's not finished, but it's also missing a lot more than it should be at this point. Now, I'd also like to note that these documents were prepared by contractors hired by the responsible parties, International Paper and BIMIC. So catching these errors is key to making sure that the cleanup is done safely and effectively. I'm going to start with talking about the missing and incomplete information. Throughout these documents, there are several instances mentioning an attachment or a table that supposedly has really important details and information about the design plan, but they were not included. And some of them that were just unfinished. An example of this would be our emergency contacts list that they have. It is incomplete, and by incomplete, I mean it is completely blank. There's no information there whatsoever. So in many places throughout the documents and tables, there are typos, grammatical errors, and that to us really just indicates that they did not put in the time or effort into making this plan that they should have. It became increasingly obvious that this 90% remedial design is not much more than a plan to make a plan at this point. There's conflicting language throughout the entire plan. Words like required and recommended are used seemingly interchangeably, which anybody who knows anything knows that something being required and something being recommended, it's not the same thing. And then we noticed that that leaves open the possibility for workers' safety and site training to fall through the cracks. And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So there needs to be consistency in the use of the terms that dictates what happens at this site and what's supposed to be done. And on top of that, there are several sections with vague language that, if it's not defined, leaves too much flexibility for the contractors that are hired and could leave workers and the community in a lot of danger, as I'm sure you guys are well aware of. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Jackie so she can go into a little bit more detail about the specifics of each of these documents.
Great, thank you. Y'all like our little watchdogs? They're in like THEA themed colors. All right, thank you, Rachel. Good job. Okay, so couple of things to watch for safety plan. And Rachel mentioned the language being left to interpretation. So the workers on site, according to the health and safety plan that's there right now, is that the training will be required for their specific jobs. For example, you are operating this type of machine equipment. You will receive training for that. But it's only recommended that the site specifics, that they have training for the site specifics. So someone operating a piece of equipment in pits that contain highly toxic material, they need to receive training on the type of material they're working with, not just that piece of machine equipment. So we need EPA to require the language be tightened up. These documents give a lot of discretion to the remedial contractor, which to the best of my knowledge has not been selected. If it has, they haven't announced it. So there's a lot given to the remedial contractor, and then from there, the project coordinator. One of the items here that we have a huge issue with, that we had a huge issue with when the last draft of this document came out, is that there are not any safety data sheets. Safety data sheets are really important to be included with the health and safety plan, because the way it should go is every worker, no matter if you're a manager, if you're picking up trash, if you're excavating material, every worker that steps on site should review this document and acknowledge that they have read it, they understand the hazards, they understand what's in the document. And so the safety data sheets typically go in the back of a health and safety plan and tell them about these specific types of chemicals that are in that site. Yes, there is a table that tells them dioxin, furans, and I think one or two other things, but the safety data sheet tells them how they can be exposed, what to do if they are exposed. You know, do you rinse your eyes out? Do you immediately take your clothes off? Like, what do you do if you come in contact with this stuff? And then what the potential outcomes could be. Do you need to see a doctor immediately? Could you have immediate respiratory distress? Like, so it's important that the workers who are on this site understand what they could possibly come in contact with and how to respond if they do. And these safety data sheets are not, this is 90%. Supposed to be done this summer. We need them to do better. You know, just saying this, I would really love to know how much they paid for these reports. The project coordinator, according to the health and safety plan, is responsible for the overall implementation of the plan. Also, there's here of the types of discretion that's given to the project coordinator and remedial contractor. The example here, a quote from the report: personal protective equipment will be selected by the remedial contractor with specific considerations to the hazards associated with work site activities. I don't think that the EPA should allow the remedial contractor to select what type of personal protective equipment the workers should have to wear, because we know there are standards as to what type of protective equipment you need to wear when you're working with these chemicals. Sure, maybe the guy excavating doesn't wear the same thing as the guy who's picking up trash. You know, the guy excavating should clearly be much more protected. But the EPA should tell them what is required, not allowing the responsible parties, hired people, to then tell the next hired person how to protect themselves. I see a lot of nods. Yes, so it seems like you guys agree, you know, that this shouldn't just be up to the contractor. Yes.
Yes, themselves would say what kind of protective measures are required.
Yes, they're not there.
I understand.
Oh, yes.
I'm saying those missing documents state what has to be followed not discretionary.
Right, and I believe those specifics you're saying, Carolyn, for the folks online, a member of the community is saying that those missing data sheets that are typically in the back say what type of protective equipment should be required. Those standards, I believe, are OSHA standards in those documents. And this, this image here, I got from the actual personal protective equipment recommendation document that came out when the EPA was only 5 years old. And recommendation for Downs and working with Downs. And so I just love that this was the cover image back in 1985. Yes.
Wondering the picture that you have of the road that they're gonna have leading out, is that an actual real picture? What side is it?
A road I showed
The
tonight.
road that they're gonna,
Oh, no, I'm sorry. The pictures shown with the walls
Yeah.
that we're gonna isolate, no, those were just examples.
Oh,
Sorry. Those images of the sheet piling, those were not images of the site currently, but examples of what that sheet piling looks like. All right, sorry, now I know that next time I won't put my headings at the top because we have that little bar that's up there. But this is now the slide for the emergency response plan. So the on-site workers will be should be trained to respond appropriately if there is an emergency on site. And the documents actually don't allow for an on-site worker to easily identify the magnitude of an emergency. So for example, if there's a release, how are these workers supposed to identify a major release versus a minor release? So there's a lot of discretion there and things that are left unsaid that really need to be, the workers need to be informed on, and it needs to be clear on how those decisions are being made, how they're gauging what is a major release into the river and what is not. Another item here that's vague has to do with equipment that should be kept nearby in the event of an emergency. So the quote I pulled from the, it's like my slide. The quote, I won't be able to tell you that word, but I pulled this from the emergency response plan. And it says a sufficient supply of emergency response cleanup equipment should be maintained at the work site to be used. I'm going to say to control, or I don't know. I'm not going to guess because I don't want to put words into a quote. But sorry that happened. So basically, it's saying a sufficient supply of emergency response cleanup equipment should be maintained at the work site. No, it has to be. It must be kept there. So I actually have a petition. Tracy, will you grab the petitions and we can go ahead and get those circulated? That it's very simple. I typed up like a couple of lines, short and sweet. We've covered a lot tonight, but I think this is one thing we should immediately let the agency know that we care about, is that they must require supplies to be kept on site to, to respond to an emergency.
I don't see any release made of anything that is released to be considered major.
Sure, thank you, Sarah. She said, for the folks online, anything being released should be considered major. She doesn't consider any type of release minor. Sure. Sure. Yeah, I mean, so the company, right, yes, so our community member asked why they aren't using companies that are already, their workers are already trained in this. And, that this is not something small they're messing with. It's us, it's the community, it's the river. So the company GHD, who prepared these documents, who's the contractor for the design of this remediation, they do these types of things. They are engineers that work on and design, tough remedial actions like this one, containment of material. And so, this is the arena of the contractor who's designing this, right? But then who's going to be hired as the contractor? And then those engineers and, those physicists and those experts, that I would hope is their arena. But then the workers that come on site, they can be regular construction workers, and if you're a regular construction worker and you're signing up to, you get a job and you're going to do excavation and you don't have a safety data sheet, you don't have a health and safety plan that makes it clear to you in a way that you can understand what exactly the risks are at that site. How can you know to protect yourself appropriately when you think, well, they're telling me what I need to wear? Hard hat, steel-toed boots, a yellow vest. It's no different than if they were excavating anywhere else at that point. All right, so I've been getting questions about this last document that we're going to chat about already tonight. So this is the information I wanted to give you all about the 90% with transportation and offsite disposal. So the roles and responsibilities clearly define who is who and who has what responsibilities when it comes to the transportation and offsite disposal. That's one of the really great things, actually, though, about these different documents I've mentioned tonight, is they do clearly define the roles. So that's good for us to know who has what roles to start with. But according to, or for the transportation document, the remedial contractor is actually responsible for managing the excavation and loading of the material. They also identify the waste classification procedures and disposal options. What I mean there, disposal options. There are likely going to be multiple disposal facilities that material from this site goes to. So let's think about how it will start. There's vegetation on top of this site. Where does that go? How is that handled? There's crushed concrete. Where does that go? There's the tarps, or the other component of this cap, the tarps. Where do they go? How are they handled? There's material that may not be contaminated, and there's material that's going to be highly contaminated. So where does, and then there will be construction debris as well, right? And so there are likely going to be different facilities that handles where these different materials are taken to. And the role and responsibility of this remedial contractor is to identify what goes where. Pretty important person. It can cost these companies a lot of money, or maybe not so much. He's got an important job. So the transportation for the material off-site is going to be by truck and or containers. They would be roll-off containers and or 20-ton and dump trucks, and they would be required to be lined. The type of liner is not clearly explained in these documents. So that's one thing that we are also pointing out. We need some more of those specifics. And so one hot item that the community has talked about when recognizing that this material needs to be taken out of the river and it needs to be taken to a stable, safe location. And folks have asked, are the trucks going to just drive out of the site? Or are they going to be washed? Are they going to be decontaminated? Are they going to have to go through additional zones before they leave that site to make sure when they go down into the excavation area or go near the excavation area to receive their load and drive off, are they carrying toxic material in their tires, on their flaps? And this document says that an inspection/cleaning station may be included, must. And at the end of the day, remember, EPA has authority here. We need EPA to require these things. These are protective measures that need to be put in place. It should not be allowed discretion of the contractors hired by the responsible parties. All right, so as you know, here's the northern pit. There's fairly easy access onto the interstate here. And this diagram is from this transportation office. It's showing you truck routes, I-10 West and I-10 East. But they're not saying which disposal facilities they're going to be using. I know previously when we've asked the EPA to identify where this waste is going, they've said, when this construction starts, those facilities could be full to capacity. There could be a newer one that's closer. There's variables there. And so given the fact that there are going to be, not a fact, given the concept that there are going to be multiple locations that material, I'm not saying waste, but that material from these sites goes to, I understand now why they have the East and the West. Sampling method and analytical methods is going to be determined by EPA this summer of how exactly the waste as it's being excavated is going to be analyzed, or as the material is being removed, how it's going to be analyzed and determine where it goes. So we are expecting that information to come out in the documents that are due to the EPA this summer. And then, obviously the routes and facilities can be determined from there. A while back, probably 2 years ago by now, we looked into potential facilities, and one that my understanding is they had their eye on was in Louisiana. It was I think it was just over 100 miles east. And I'm sorry, the name is slipping my mind, but that facility ended up closing. It ended up getting to capacity. And so that's no longer a consideration. Beyond that, we haven't heard where else it might be considered, but it's actually really surprising how many of these types of facilities are around. And, that you might not even recognize that a facility you maybe even drive by is somewhere that could receive these different types of waste material. And we absolutely are looking at how these sites are monitored, these locations, how they're monitored, how they're constructed, how they're closed, like the one in Louisiana, full to capacity, no longer accepting waste. Well, what happens to the stuff that's there, right? And so Louisiana does something where they actually grow cropland over some of their closed sites. So, okay. So that was really interesting to learn when we were digging into that. But we certainly are paying attention to all of those details.
Jackie, we have a question in the chat
Sure,
about this.
sure.
From Gilbert Hoffman, says
Yeah.
your transportation narrative doesn't mention barges. Is this not an option?
Thanks, Gil. So we had a question online from Gil about the transportation method not mentioning barges. It is not being considered. The last time I talked to the EPA about this, the conversation was around that they didn't feel it was as efficient and safe because of the risk of losing the material as you're loading it onto barges and the toxicity of it. That was the last I talked to the agency about it. That'd be a great question, Gil, for you to ask them. I'd love to read your the response you got in the newspaper. But the transportation report specifically mentions the 20-ton trucks and the roll-off containers. Oh, now to a happy topic. All right. Okay. So we are getting towards the end of the agenda, and I will be happy to answer y'all's questions. We just have a couple more items. Okay, so we are having our first annual Clean Mud for Bugs Crawfish Boil fundraiser at Carbach Brewery. It's a really lovely venue. We're quite excited. It's going to be April 30th. You can purchase tickets on our website, and they're on sale now. And you do need to purchase your tickets in advance so we can find out how many pounds of crawfish to get. And so we're really looking forward to it. Hope you will consider joining us and supporting our work and supporting this event. It'll be nice to actually conversate and enjoy time, with one another, with our supporters, where we're not talking about dump trucks and waste pits and things like that. And if you want to talk about that, I'm always happy to talk about it anyways. Yes.
So,
Okay.
when the construction is going on in the river, are they gonna allow boating, recreation?
Great question. So, I actually didn't, now that you're mentioning it, I don't recall seeing anything in safety plans. Rachel, do you, that had anything to do with notifying recreators?
Maybe end up having boat races for all we know.
Yeah.
I think they made some mention about needing to have it like marked off and to make sure that if there are people like recreating or other boats that they need to like warn them.
Okay,
I would have to go back and reread it to make sure if
okay,
it's like goes into like real specifics about that. But I think they mentioned it, but they didn't go into like any, no, we can't let this happen.
right, okay, yeah, because it's such a narrow channel right there. So we'll inquire with the agency and definitely have a response for you at our next meeting, let you know exactly what they are looking at. We'll have a conversation with the agency about that. We do believe there was something where Rachel was saying that there was something in there that mentioned, putting like marking off the area, but we all know that people fish inside the buoys as is. So, what are they going to do to mark it off? It really needs to be apparent. Also, something that has come up before is the navigable waterway and how all of this construction is going to interact with the barge traffic. And the EPA actually meets pretty regularly with TxDOT and with the other agencies. And so there should be coordination with the Coast Guard and with the vessels during the construction. One thing I wanted to update y'all on was the TxDOT projects. So the Dolphin and Fender projects that y'all are aware of that are on the east side of in the river, on the east side, and then right there by I-10. They were supposed to be repaired and or replaced, but that has been delayed. And Yeah, I don't think that there's actually any plan in place. The EPA has periodic meetings with TxDOT to go over these because they are looking at what other activities are taking place in the river and how is that going to affect the site. The road, the access road for the waste pits cleanup is a TxDOT road. So it's of particular interest how they will be able to access the site from the ground versus the river. And then also the I-10 bridge project, they're continuing to have their quarterly meetings with, between EPA and TxDOT to talk about the bridge replacement. But the EPA loves to remind us when we have our meetings with them that this project is not funded. And so, yeah, you know, they've got to get the funding in place. But I was actually reading something in the documents that we just reviewed, and it mentioned the year 2030. It mentioned like monitoring that will start once it's cleaned up in 2030. So how does all of this tie in the next 8 years? We're not just talking about this year, you know, so these quarterly meetings and the coordination of the agencies is really important. Okay, so in our agenda here, if you are with us in person, we have the Channelview Health and Improvement Coalition, shout out. They have their next meeting on Thursday at 6:30. Carolyn is here and she has spearheaded Channelview Health and Improvement Coalition. Do you want to say anything about the meeting, Carolyn?
Precinct 3. A representative from Precinct 3 for the newly redistricted area should be there, and they should be there in our April meeting also. They had said they're going to come and listen.
Awesome. Great. So wonderful group to be engaged with, involved in. And so they're meeting this Thursday. And our next meetings, we have a town hall on March 29th, which is only a week away. And then we won't have our next coalition meeting here until May 10th. So at our town hall meetings are, for those of you who have not tuned in, we're doing something a little different because we're working in 3 different areas of Harris County. So our town hall meetings roll in between our 3 community meetings. And at our town hall meetings in 1 hour, I discuss high level updates. I don't get into all the details, but just the high points for each of the communities we work with. Just like these meetings, we always post those to our YouTube channel. And there's in the description, you can see what part you can skip ahead to if you don't want to listen to the other updates. If you just want to hear updates for the San Jacinto, it'll tell you where you can skip to in that recording. And so, as I mentioned, that'll be next week. And then in the beginning of May, we will have our next meeting here. Okay, questions, comments? Yes, Carolyn.
First, I have a couple of questions. But first, how high above the water level will the wall be expected? Or not? How high is that wall?
Right. Yep. So it was supposed to be in the early discussions was above max storm surge height. If I'm remembering correct, remember, like I've had a baby since then, and you've had a baby, you understand. They take your brain. So this was several years ago that I heard this number, but I believe maximum storm surge height is 24 feet. So it should be built at least to that. So part of the complexity is, okay, you have to go up that high above the river surface. And then you also then now have to go down 30 feet. So you are looking at, first of all, it's material. You can't make this material in a factory. It's got to be made and welded together there to get that length. So bringing that in, welding it together, the installment process, all of that, and then making sure, that it is above that feet. And I want to say, I remember hearing a number in the last couple of years, like 70 feet was around what they were looking at, the length of the piling.
Then, comment,
Yes.
this new plan seems to be following the same. Instead of requirements, are putting in, not putting in those safety features. So you're just following the same thing. That's not showing the requirement specific for you as results. And all that, it seems like they're doing exactly what they did before. Then the very bit of it, when it's due and supposed to be ready to put in place, they say, oh, this is. Let's start over.
Sure, good point, Carolyn. Thanks for bringing that up. So, talking about how it seems like they're kind of doing what they were doing before, the vague language. And then is this, potentially going to lead to this is not feasible, being able to say that. One thing I will say that the EPA has continued to respond with in these types of technical documents and, discussion of feasibility is that this is feasible. I've seen them hold firm on that. So Carolyn's comment brought me to a great point, which is our elected officials, right? We've had great success in the past engaging our elected officials, letting them know we're concerned about this, what the concerns are, what they should be concerned about. And that's from everywhere from here to Galveston. Because at the end of the day, if the wall gives way, if there's a major event there, or in the next hurricane or the next major flood, right? It could be in a natural event that there was a disaster. They're gonna care about it down there. So I will definitely be taking the petitions and using them as talking points with the elected officials, letting them know the concerns here.
The redistricting.
Yes,
I'm
Karen.
encouraged, I'm hoping to be encouraged, the fact that Ramsey is.
Yes,
He has, to me, he should have the ability to have a better understanding of the situation. Partly, be able to diagnose the situation better than.
yes. The comment is about Commissioner Ramsey and that he should, he's an engineer, so residents are hopeful, right? That he would get this maybe a little bit better. I met with Commissioner Ramsey and he's really concerned about the environmental things that I brought to him. We had a really great meeting and he's very engaged and I absolutely look forward to his office's involvement with this effort. Greg.
So who's gonna monitor these people when they take their tests? Who's gonna monitor if they send the material to the right place? Is it gonna be a third party monitor or are they gonna rely on the EPA? The EPA doesn't have to have somebody around.
Right, so EPA should be on site during this. They should have somebody on site during this. Now that's should, right? That's another one of those words. So making sure that there is in fact someone independent of the contractors on site. Now, does it go a step further? Over the years, right, we've discussed an independent contractor, independent of EPA, independent of the responsible parties, totally independent, not working for any of them to oversee what goes on. That happened in Love Canal. It's happened since the beginning of Superfund. It's not unheard of. And so that's definitely a thing that we can continue discussing with the EPA, but I think, and the first part of your question, Greg, about the sampling is that the EPA could require split sampling. So the samples would be split and sent to 2 different labs. And my opinion is that is the best approach rather than relying on samples sent to one lab. So it could, for example, part of the sample. One half could go to the contractor's lab and the other could go to the EPA's lab. It's another, they have required split sampling some of the time throughout this process. Yes, Carolyn.
Okay, no, since no one asked the question. Raw containers, they should be stored at the site. Or, say you sell river estates, vacant properties, or anywhere near. They'll just, an individual who was storing. Without the, flooding, are they going to steal? Are they?
Mhm.
So if you have these. Or any flood zone, even if it's somewhere else.
Right.
It's a flooding.
Yeah, so, great point, Carolyn. So the concern of the roll-off containers being stored in the flood zone, even if it's not on site, but if it's in the flood zone, that being a concern, what happens if there's a flooding event? And we all know they can pop up quickly. Now I know the agency was looking for land to use to stage material and that they were having trouble. We tried to put them in contact with some local landowners and people. And so I know that we're having trouble finding staging areas, which is, you have to have that here when you're working in an area that's in the river. But when it comes to sampling the material, the sampling is not like that. Like, it's not like a pH or a turbidity or it's not something that you can quickly observe. When you're sampling for dioxin and these chemicals, a standard turnaround time from a lab is weeks. Now you can get a rushed order in probably 7 days, but that means the material itself will have to be staged. So is it loaded on trucks or in containers and then staged? Like, where is it staged? So that's a big part of this as well. Staging it so they can classify and send it to the appropriate place. How's online? Are there any questions? Okay,
They have the ability to unmute themselves and ask us.
okay, great. Right. Yeah, okay, Carol, let's get to work. All right. I'm just gonna come by you so the folks online can hear.
The barge track during the construction, during the remediation and stuff, is there being considered or will there be a barge traffic moratorium or construction moratorium? I mean, we're fighting against anything being put forth with I-10 into that area. But we already have one barge facility there, definitely. So is there going to be a discussion about the moratorium put on any new thing being put there until this is cleaned up? And then my next question is the bridge that's currently not funded. Is that being included in what's going to be the I-10 expansion, or is that a separate issue?
So they meet quarterly to talk about how the expansion could impact the site. And, I was even communicating for a while with their, I believe his title was the project coordinator, and then the geologist that they hired, the TxDOT hired for that project. And, they certainly are in communication and coordinating closely with the EPA. But at this time, there's not a lot moving forward with that because they don't have funding for it. But it's absolutely a concern for a variety of reasons. Yes, Carol.
About what is the I-10 separate from the I-10 expansion?
What do you mean I can? Like, I know the interstate, but I mean, what do you mean the, right?
In fact, back on we would have to leave. They were supposed to have same day. But, they're supposed to be doing the expansion, but they didn't go away. And raising the level of I-10 all the way to where it meets 59 downtown.
Yes.
So the bridge project would be in the middle of all of that. Is that a separate issue?
No, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Well, at least this portion. I don't know what parts of the project. It's a massive project that had, so I don't know what parts have funding, but the part at the bridge at a minimum isn't currently funded according to the EPA. So their meetings with TxDOT, there's doesn't appear to be a whole lot going on there. Good point. Your first question about barges, is there going to be a moratorium for barge traffic north of the interstate? We can talk to the EPA about what barge traffic is going to look like, what it is going to be allowed to be like during construction, whose jurisdiction, who has what authorities, who's going to be involved, so we don't get the finger pointing during the remediation. That's really important. And I think that at a minimum, like a one-pager for the community, or a page, even a page on the EPA's website of who the community can contact during remediation, if they do see an issue with a vessel or something on site, near the site, that they're concerned about, because you've got a bunch of different agencies when you start talking about the waterway and the interstate and the land and the bottom of the river. It's all, you got a bunch of hands involved. So something to help the community know who is involved in what. All right, y'all, we are about 15 minutes over. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up. We've got folks online so they can hop off, and thank you all for being a good audience, for being engaged, and for being here. Very nice to be back in person here, the community that I come from. All right, thanks. See you guys later.